My mother-in-law slapped my 6-year-old daughter because she wouldn't give her dress to my sister-in-law's kid. When I confronted them, my sil spat in my face, saying, "You should teach your daughter some manners." My husband just stood there nodding, "You know they're right." I didn't scream. I didn't hit back. I just grabbed my daughter and left the venue immediately. That night, I packed our bags and left. What I did next left all of them speechless. I never imagined my life would turn into a revenge story worthy of Reddit, but here we are. My name is Amber, and this is the story of how my marriage imploded at my brother-in-law's wedding, and how I turned my life around in the most spectacular way possible. Let me start from the beginning. I'd been married to David for 8 years, and we had a beautiful daughter named Rose. David came from what I can only describe as a toxic family dynasty. His mother, Beth, was the kind of woman who believed the world revolved around her precious sons, and his sister, Carol, was a carbon copy of their mother's entitled behavior. The wedding was for David's younger brother, Mark. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but the Johnson family had a way of turning every celebration into a power struggle. Rose had been so excited about wearing her new dress, a beautiful pale pink number with little flowers that we picked out together specifically for this day. She looked absolutely precious in it, and I'd spend extra money I didn't really have to make sure she felt special. The trouble started during the reception. Carol's daughter, Sophia, was notorious for being spoiled rotten. At 5 years old, she was already displaying the same entitled behavior as her mother and grandmother. When Sophia saw Rose's dress, she immediately decided she wanted it. "I want that dress," Sophia announced, pointing at Rose. "It's Rose's special dress for today, sweetheart," I said gently, trying to deflect. But Carol wasn't having it. "Come on, Amber. Let the girls switch. Sophia really loves that dress, and honestly, it would look better on her anyway." I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my voice steady. "Rose picked this dress out specifically for today. She's been looking forward to wearing it." That's when Beth decided to insert herself into the situation. "Amber, don't be ridiculous. They're just children. Rose can wear something else." "No," Rose said quietly, clutching the skirt of her dress. "It's mine." And that's when it happened. Beth, this woman who was supposed to be Rose's grandmother, raised her hand and slapped my 6-year-old daughter across the face. The sound echoed through the reception hall, and Rose's cry of shock and pain cut through me like a knife. I moved toward them, my protective instincts flaring, but before I could reach Rose, Carol stepped into my path. "You should teach your daughter some manners," she said, and then she spat directly in my face. I stood there, stunned, with Carol's saliva dripping down my cheek. My daughter was crying, my mother-in-law was standing there looking satisfied, and my sister-in-law was smirking at me like she'd just won some kind of victory. But the worst part? The absolute worst part was turning to see my husband, the man who was supposed to protect our daughter, standing there nodding in agreement. "You know they're right, Amber," David said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescension I'd grown to hate. "Rose does need to learn to share." In that moment, something inside me broke. Not just broke, it shattered completely. This man, who had promised to love and protect our family, was siding with the people who had just assaulted our child. Our 6-year-old daughter. I didn't scream. I didn't hit back. I didn't cause a scene that would give them ammunition to use against me later. Instead, I walked over to Rose, wiped her tears, and took her hand. "We're leaving," I said quietly. "Amber, don't be dramatic," Beth called after us. "It's just a little slap. Children need discipline." I didn't respond. I just walked out of that reception hall with my daughter's hand in mine, leaving behind a marriage that I now realized had been dead for years. That night, while David was still at the reception, probably celebrating with his horrible family, I packed our bags. I threw everything important into suitcases: clothes, documents, Rose's favorite toys, my laptop, and the small amount of cash I'd been secretly saving in case of emergencies. I'd learned from watching too many true crime documentaries to always have an escape fund. Rose was quiet as I packed, sitting on her bed and watching me fold clothes with the efficiency of someone who had mentally rehearsed this moment countless times. Her cheek still bore the red mark from Beth's slap, and every time I looked at it, my resolve strengthened. "Mommy, are we going on a trip?" she asked in her small voice. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to stay with Aunt Rachel for a while," I said, referring to my sister who lived 3 hours away. Rachel had been urging me to leave David for years, sensing what I'd been too blind or too hopeful to see. "What about Daddy?" I paused in my packing, considering how to answer. "Daddy made some choices tonight that hurt us both. We need some time away from him to think about things." Rose nodded solemnly. At 6 years old, she was already too familiar with the concept of adults making bad choices that hurt children. That realization broke my heart all over again. As I packed, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from David's family. Beth had sent a long text about how I was overreacting and how children needed to learn respect. Carol sent a series of increasingly nasty messages, calling me dramatic and pathetic. Even Mark's new wife, Lisa, sent a message asking me to think about the family and come back to work things out. I screenshotted every single message. Documentation had become second nature to me over the years, though I'd never imagined I'd need it for something like this. The most revealing message came from David himself, sent at 2:47 a.m. "Amber, you're embarrassing me. My whole family is asking where you are. Just come back and we'll talk about this tomorrow when you calm down. Not an apology. Not concern for Rose. Just worry about his own embarrassment. It was so perfectly David that I almost laughed. I finished packing and loaded everything into my car while Rose slept. The house felt different in the darkness, not like home anymore, but like a museum of a life I was leaving behind. I walked through each room one last time, taking photos on my phone. Not for sentimental reasons, but for documentation. I wanted proof of how we'd lived, what we'd built together, before David's lawyers could claim we'd had nothing. In David's home office, I found exactly what I'd hoped I wouldn't find. Financial documents showing accounts I didn't know about. Investment portfolios in his name only. A life insurance policy where he'd recently changed the beneficiary from Rose and me to just Rose, with Beth listed as the guardian if something happened to me. The implications of that change, made just 3 months ago, sent chills down my spine. I photographed everything with my phone, then carefully put the documents back exactly as I'd found them. David's meticulous nature worked in my favor. He'd never noticed they'd been disturbed unless he was looking for evidence of my snooping. The drive to Rachel's house took 4 hours in the middle of the night. Rose slept in her car seat for most of the journey, occasionally stirring to ask if we were almost there. Each mile that passed between us and David's family felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. Rachel met us at her door in her pajamas, having stayed up waiting despite the late hour. She took one look at the bruise on Rose's face and pulled us both into a fierce hug. "I should have pushed harder for you to leave him years ago," she whispered as Rose dozed on her couch. I wasn't ready then, I admitted. I kept thinking things would get better. That he'd eventually stand up to his family. That Rose would be enough to make him choose us. And now? Now I know better. Tonight showed me exactly who David is when it matters most. He's a coward who will always choose the path of least resistance, even if it means sacrificing his own child. Rachel made us tea and listened as I recounted the evening's events in detail. As a nurse, she'd seen child abuse cases before, and her professional assessment was grimmer than I'd hoped. "Amber, what Beth did wasn't discipline. It was assault. Rose is going to need therapy to process this, especially with her own father not protecting her. And that mark on her face? We need to document it properly." The next morning, we took Rose to Rachel's pediatrician, Dr. Kim, who had been treating children for 20 years. She took one look at Rose's cheek and immediately began documenting everything: photos, measurements, detailed notes about the injury pattern. "This is consistent with an adult hand striking a child's face with significant force," Dr. Kim told me privately. "The bruising pattern shows it wasn't a light tap. Whoever did this intended to cause pain." She provided me with copies of all the medical documentation, along with her professional assessment that this constituted child abuse. It was devastating to hear, but exactly what I needed for the legal battle I knew was coming. That afternoon, David finally called. "Amber, what the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just disappear with Rose. I'm her father." "You're the man who stood there and watched your mother assault our daughter," I replied calmly. "You're the man who told me they were right to hurt her." "It wasn't assault, Amber. It was discipline. You're being ridiculous." "David, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. Your mother physically struck our 6-year-old daughter hard enough to leave bruises because Rose wouldn't give away her dress. Your sister spat in my face. And you supported them. That's not discipline, that's abuse. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. Rose needs to learn." I hung up on him. For the first time in 8 years of marriage, I hung up on David mid-sentence. The power in that simple action was intoxicating. Over the next few days, the calls and messages intensified. David's strategy seemed to cycle between anger, manipulation, and false promises. His family joined in, with Beth leaving voicemails about how I was keeping Rose from her loving grandmother and Carol texting about how I was destroying the family over nothing. The most revealing call came from David's mother directly. Beth's voice on the voicemail was cold and calculating. "Amber, you're making a huge mistake. David is a good provider, and Rose needs stability. If you think you can do better on your own, you're delusional. You'll come crawling back within a month, mark my words. And when you do, don't expect us to welcome you with open arms." I saved that voicemail. Beth's mask had slipped, revealing the manipulative woman beneath the grandmother facade. She wasn't concerned about Rose's well-being, she was concerned about maintaining control. Rachel helped me research divorce attorneys while Rose played with her cousins. The normalcy of children's laughter in the background while I planned the dissolution of my marriage felt surreal, but also hopeful. Rose was already seeming lighter, more relaxed, away from the constant tension of David's family dynamics. "You need someone who specializes in high-conflict custody cases," Rachel advised. "Someone who understands psychological abuse and parental alienation." That's when I remembered Margaret Chen, one of the partners at my law firm. Margaret had built her reputation on protecting mothers and children from abusive family situations. I'd assisted on some of her cases and seen her reduce grown men to tears with her meticulous preparation and fierce advocacy. I called Margaret on Monday morning, 3 days after the wedding incident. "Amber? I was wondering when you'd call," Margaret said, surprising me. "Linda Morrison mentioned you might need some help." Linda Morrison was the senior partner's wife, and more importantly, she was David's supervisor's wife. I'd forgotten about my friendship with Linda in the chaos of everything else. You've heard about what happened? Enough to know you need legal representation immediately. Can you be in my office this afternoon? And bring everything: photos, medical records, financial documents, everything. Margaret's office felt like a war room. Charts covered the walls, legal books were stacked everywhere, and her desk was covered with case files. She listened without interruption as I recounted the entire story, occasionally taking notes or asking for clarification. This is actually more straightforward than most cases I handle, she said when I finished. You have clear documentation of assault, multiple witnesses, medical records, and evidence of your husband's failure to protect. The challenge will be David's family's resources and connections. What do you mean? Beth volunteers at the Children's Hospital, which gives her credibility in the community. Carol's husband is a lawyer, which means they'll have legal advice. David works in finance, so he has the appearance of stability. They'll try to paint you as an unstable mother who's overreacting to normal family discipline. My heart sank. So they might win? Margaret smiled grimly. Oh, honey, they have no idea what they're up against. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never lost a case involving clear child abuse. We're going to bury them in documentation, expert testimony, and legal precedent. By the time I'm done, they'll wish they'd never touched your daughter. The legal strategy Margaret outlined was comprehensive and ruthless. We would file for divorce and emergency custody simultaneously, seeking immediate protection for Rose. We would pursue criminal charges for the assault. We would document every instance of harassment and intimidation from David's family. And we would use David's own words and actions against him to demonstrate his unfitness as a parent. The key, Margaret explained, is to control the narrative from the beginning. We don't respond to their attacks, we stay focused on Rose's safety and well-being. Every decision we make, every action we take, has to be about protecting that little girl. That evening, I called my parents in Florida to explain the situation. They were horrified and immediately offered to fly up to help, but I asked them to wait. I needed to handle the initial legal proceedings without distractions, and I wanted Rose to have some stability at Rachel's house. Amber, we always knew David's family was trouble, my mother said gently. We just hoped you'd see it before something like this happened. Why didn't you say anything? Would you have listened? You loved him, and you wanted to make it work. Sometimes people have to come to these realizations on their own. She was right. I dismissed concerns from family and friends for years, always making excuses for David's behavior and his family's treatment of Rose and me. I'd been so invested in the idea of being a good wife and making my marriage work that I'd ignored every red flag. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal preparation. Margaret's team worked around the clock to build our case. Private investigators gathered background information on David's family. Child psychologists evaluated Rose and provided professional assessments of the trauma she'd experienced. Financial experts analyzed David's assets and income to determine appropriate support arrangements. Rose, meanwhile, was thriving at Rachel's house. Away from the constant stress of David's family, she was sleeping better, eating better, and playing more freely. She'd started drawing pictures of our new life, images of her and me in a small house with a garden, far away from the people who had hurt us. One drawing particularly struck me. It showed Rose in her pink dress, but in this version, she was standing behind a tall fence with me beside her. On the other side of the fence were stick figures with angry faces, clearly representing David's family. The message was clear: she felt safe when there were barriers between her and them. Dr. Amber Martinez, the child psychologist Margaret had recommended, spent several hours with Rose and provided a detailed assessment. Her report was damning. Rose shows clear signs of trauma consistent with family violence, Dr. Martinez explained. She's hypervigilant around adult authority figures, she apologizes excessively, and she shows signs of regression in her emotional development. This isn't the result of a single incident, this is a pattern of psychological abuse that has been building over time. The report recommended immediate cessation of contact with the perpetrators, ongoing therapy for Rose, and careful monitoring of any future contact with her father. It also noted that Rose expressed fear about returning to her previous living situation and showed significant anxiety when discussing her father's family. When David came home the next morning, hungover and reeking of alcohol, he found an empty house and a note explaining that Rose and I were gone. What he didn't know was that I'd already put my plan into motion. See, David and his family made one crucial mistake. They underestimated me. They saw me as just a quiet wife and mother, someone who would take their abuse and come crawling back. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. I'm a paralegal. I've been working at Morrison & Associates, one of the top family law firms in the state, for 6 years. I know the law, I know how divorces work, and I know how to protect myself and my daughter. More importantly, I've been documenting everything for years. Every nasty comment from Beth. Every time David chose his family over Rose and me. Every instance of financial control and emotional manipulation. I had photos, videos, text messages, and a detailed journal going back 3 years. I'd started keeping records when I realized David's family's behavior was escalating, but I never thought I'd actually need to use them. The Monday after the wedding, I filed for divorce and an emergency custody order. I presented evidence of David's family's pattern of behavior, including witness statements from other family members who had seen Beth's treatment of Rose over the years. I also filed a police report for the assault on Rose and the assault on me. But that was just the beginning. The legal filing sent shockwaves through David's family. Within days of the papers being served, my phone was ringing constantly. I changed my number twice, but somehow they kept getting the new one. Beth left increasingly unhinged voicemails, alternating between threats and pleas. Carol's messages became so vicious that Margaret advised me to file for a restraining order. But the most telling response came from David himself. Instead of calling me directly, he contacted my boss at the law firm trying to get me fired. Amber is having some kind of mental breakdown, he told Mr. Morrison, my senior partner. She's making false accusations about my family and needs professional help. I'm worried about her stability in a legal environment. Mr. Morrison, to his credit, immediately called me. Amber, I want you to know that I've received a concerning call from your husband. However, given Linda's friendship with you and what she's told me about the situation, I'm inclined to believe there's more to this story. I arranged to meet with Mr. Morrison that afternoon, bringing Margaret with me. We presented him with all the evidence, the medical records, the photos, the documented history of Beth's behavior, and the recordings of David's family's harassment. Mr. Morrison's expression grew darker as he reviewed each piece of evidence. Amber, I owe you an apology. When your husband called, I was prepared to offer you paid leave to handle your personal situation. Now I'm prepared to offer you the full resources of this firm if you need them. He also had news that would prove crucial to my case. I've been friends with Tom Brennan, Carol's husband, for 20 years. We went to law school together. I think he needs to know what his wife has been involved in. The call to Tom was a masterpiece of professional courtesy and devastating revelation. Mr. Morrison simply asked Tom to lunch and then presented him with the evidence of Carol's assault on me and her defense of child abuse. Tom's reaction was immediate and decisive. I had no idea, Tom said, his voice shaking with anger. Carol told me there was some family drama at the wedding, but she said Amber was overreacting to normal discipline. She never mentioned spitting in anyone's face or defending someone hitting a child. Tom's law firm specialized in family advocacy and child protection. The irony of Carol being married to someone whose career was built on protecting children from abuse wasn't lost on any of us. Tom made it clear that his marriage was in serious trouble, and he began consulting with his own attorneys within weeks. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation was moving forward. Detective Martinez had interviewed multiple witnesses from the wedding, and the evidence was substantial. The prosecutor's office was treating this as a serious case, though they warned me that the legal process would take time. Mrs. Johnson, these cases typically take 12 to 18 months to fully resolve, Detective Martinez explained. We want to be thorough and make sure we have an airtight case before proceeding to trial. The detective also revealed something that concerned me deeply. We've spoken with other family members, and this isn't the first time Beth has been physical with children. David's brother Mark's wife told us that Beth struck their nephew at a family gathering 2 years ago. The family covered it up then, but she's willing to testify now. This revelation opened up a whole new avenue of investigation. Detective Martinez began interviewing extended family members and family friends, uncovering a troubling pattern of behavior that stretched back years. Beth had been using physical discipline on family children for decades, always with the family's tacit approval, always covered it up and excused. Over the following months, the case built steadily. David's professional situation deteriorated gradually as word spread through his industry. While he wasn't immediately fired, clients began requesting different advisors, and his career prospects dimmed considerably. Beth's volunteer position at the hospital was placed under review pending the outcome of the criminal case. The hospital couldn't immediately terminate her 15 years of service based on allegations alone, but they quietly reassigned her to administrative duties with no patient contact while they conducted their own investigation. One particularly damaging witness was David's aunt, Beth's sister-in-law, who had kept detailed journals about family gatherings for years. Her entries documented Beth's increasingly aggressive behavior toward children, including several instances where she disciplined children who weren't even her grandchildren. She's always believed that children need to be kept in line, the aunt testified during her deposition. She said many times that parents today are too soft, that children in her day knew better than to talk back or refuse adult requests. She sees herself as doing the parents a favor by teaching the children respect. This testimony was crucial because it established Beth's mindset and pattern of behavior. It wasn't just about Rose's dress, it was about Beth's fundamental belief that she had the right to physically discipline any child who didn't meet her standards of compliance. The media attention began slowly but built over several months. Local news outlets initially picked up the story as a straightforward assault case, but as details emerged about the family dynamics and the wealthy, connected family involved, interest grew. The turning point came when someone leaked portions of the police report to a local news station. While the full security footage couldn't be broadcast due to legal restrictions during the ongoing case, enough details emerged to paint a clear picture of what had happened. It was damaging evidence that contradicted every excuse David's family had been making. Over the following year, as the criminal case progressed, the story gained more attention on social media. #JusticeForRose began trending periodically on Twitter. Facebook groups dedicated to child protection shared updates about the case. TikTok users created videos explaining the legal proceedings and expressing support for Rose. Beth and Carol's names became recognizable in our local community. They couldn't go to their usual restaurants or shops without facing uncomfortable stares and whispered conversations. Carol was eventually asked to resign from her position on the school board as the case gained more publicity. Beth's hospital volunteer status remained under review throughout the criminal proceedings. The social media attention also brought forward more witnesses. Other parents from Rose's school shared stories about Beth's inappropriate behavior at school events. Former hospital volunteers came forward with accounts of Beth's controlling and aggressive behavior toward families. Even former neighbors shared stories about noise complaints and conflicts over property lines. David's professional reputation suffered gradually over the 18 months it took for the criminal case to proceed. The financial advisory firm where he worked initially stood by him, but as more details became public and clients grew uncomfortable, his position became untenable. He wasn't immediately terminated, but his client portfolio was quietly redistributed, and he eventually resigned under pressure. The legal battle intensified over time as David's family realized they were facing not just custody issues, but potential criminal conviction and civil liability. They hired expensive lawyers and private investigators, trying to find any information that might shift the narrative. Their investigative efforts produced mixed results. The private investigator they hired to examine my background found nothing damaging, but did uncover evidence of David's secretive financial planning and his family's history of manipulation. When the investigator's final report was submitted to David's lawyers, Margaret was able to obtain it through legal discovery, revealing information that proved crucial to our case. "Your husband has been planning for a potential divorce for over a year," Margaret revealed, showing me the investigator's findings along with financial records uncovered during discovery. "He's been moving money into accounts you don't have access to, consulting with attorneys about custody strategies, and his mother has been researching ways to challenge your fitness as a parent." The evidence showed that David had anticipated our marriage ending and had been taking steps to minimize my rights and maximize his control over Rose. He'd consulted with multiple law firms about custody strategies, focusing on ways to paint me as unstable or unfit. He'd moved nearly $50,000 into a separate account, and had been documenting instances where I'd been stressed or overwhelmed as a parent. Most concerning of all, he'd been recording our conversations for months, hoping to capture evidence of instability or unfitness. The recordings, obtained through legal discovery, instead captured David's own problematic statements about prioritizing his family's demands over Rose's well-being and his acknowledgement that his mother was difficult but his refusal to set appropriate boundaries. "I know my mom can be harsh," David said in one recording, "but she's family. Amber needs to learn to deal with it. Rose needs to learn to respect her elders, even when they're difficult. That's just how family works." In another recording, David explicitly stated his belief that I was too protective of Rose and that his family's harsh treatment would toughen her up for the real world. He'd been planning to seek custody based on his belief that I was raising Rose to be too soft and too sensitive. The recordings revealed the depth of David's betrayal and his fundamental misunderstanding of parenting. He saw his family's abuse as character building rather than harmful. He saw my protection of Rose as weakness rather than appropriate parenting. He'd been building a case against me for months, never imagining that his own words would be used against him. David worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown. What he didn't know was that I'd been friends with his supervisor's wife, Linda, for 2 years. We'd met at Rose's school and bonded over coffee and complaints about our husband's long hours. Linda had confided in me about her husband's strict policies regarding employee conduct and how the firm prided itself on family values. I didn't have to tell Linda anything directly. I simply mentioned, during one of our regular coffee dates, that I was going through a difficult time and that David's family had been inappropriate with Rose. Linda, being the concerned friend she was, asked for details. When I reluctantly shared what had happened at the wedding, she was horrified. "Amber, you know I have to tell Robert about this, right? The firm has a zero-tolerance policy for domestic violence situations. It's not just about David's personal life, it's about the trust clients place in our advisors." Within a week, David was suspended pending investigation. The firm couldn't risk having an advisor whose family was involved in child abuse allegations. David's career, which he'd spent 10 years building, was suddenly hanging by a thread. But I wasn't done. Beth worked as a volunteer coordinator at the local children's hospital. She'd held that position for 15 years and was incredibly proud of it. She loved telling people about her important work with sick children. What she didn't realize was that hospitals have very strict policies about volunteers, especially regarding any history of violence against children. I didn't have to say much. I simply made sure the right people knew about the police report and the ongoing investigation. The hospital's administration took swift action. Beth was quietly removed from her volunteer position and banned from hospital grounds. 15 years of work, gone. Carol thought she was untouchable because she was married to a successful lawyer. But her husband, Tom, was a partner at a firm that specialized in family law and child advocacy. When Tom found out what Carol had done, not from gossip, but from official court documents that became part of the public record, he was furious. Tom called me personally to apologize and to let me know that he was considering his own options regarding his marriage. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Carol had shown violent tendencies, and Tom was tired of making excuses for her behavior. Meanwhile, David was spiraling. He'd moved back in with his parents, lost his job, and was facing the reality that he might lose custody of Rose entirely. He tried calling me dozens of times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. "Amber, please, we can work this out. My family was wrong, okay? I admit it. Just come home and we'll figure it out. Then the voicemails got angry, you're destroying my life over nothing. Rose wasn't even hurt that badly. And finally, they became pathetic, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Please don't take Rose away from me. I'll do anything. But I was done listening to David's apologies. I'd heard them before, after every incident with his family. The pattern was always the same, his family would do something horrible, I'd be upset, David would make excuses, I'd eventually calm down, and nothing would change. This time was different. This time, I had proof of everything. The divorce proceedings moved steadily over the course of 18 months, running parallel to the criminal case. David's lawyer advised him to accept reasonable terms rather than fight a battle that was becoming increasingly difficult to win. I was awarded primary custody of Rose with supervised visitation for David. I received the house, my car, and a fair settlement that would ensure Rose and I could start fresh. But the real victory came when the criminal trial finally concluded. Rose and I had moved to a new city, about 2 hours away from David's family, while the legal proceedings continued. I'd gotten a job at another law firm, this one specializing in victims' rights. Rose was doing well in her new school, making friends and working with a therapist to process everything that had happened. David, meanwhile, had lost his career momentum and was working at a smaller firm for significantly less money. His family relationships were strained. Beth was facing serious criminal charges, Carol's marriage to Tom had ended in divorce, and David was living alone in a small apartment. That's when I got the call I'd been waiting for through 2 years of legal proceedings. Mrs. Amber? The voice on the phone was familiar. This is Detective Martinez with the County Prosecutor's Office. We've completed the criminal trial, and I wanted to update you on the outcome. Beth was convicted of assault on a minor and received 4 months in jail plus 2 years of probation. Carol was convicted of assault and received 60 days plus community service. Both were ordered to attend anger management classes and were prohibited from contacting Rose or me. The trial had been thorough and devastating for Beth and Carol. Multiple witnesses testified about their pattern of behavior over the years. Other family members came forward with accounts of inappropriate behavior and manipulation. Rose's therapist testified about the trauma she'd suffered, and the medical evidence clearly supported the severity of the assault. But the real justice came from watching their world gradually crumble around them over the course of those 2 years. Beth's reputation in the community was destroyed. The woman who had spent years judging others was now the subject of everyone else's judgment. Her volunteer position at the hospital was permanently terminated following her conviction. Carol's marriage ended in a bitter divorce. Tom was awarded primary custody of their daughter, and Carol was left with limited visitation rights. The irony wasn't lost on me. She defended her mother's assault on my child, only to lose regular access to her own child as a result. David never fully recovered professionally. He eventually found steady work, but at a much lower level than where he'd been before. He moved into a modest apartment and spent his limited visits with Rose desperately trying to rebuild a relationship that he damaged through his cowardice and poor judgment. As for Rose and me, we thrived. Rose grew up strong and confident, knowing that her mother would always protect her. She excelled in school, made wonderful friends, and never had to endure another family gathering where she was treated as less than. I eventually met someone new, a kind, gentle man named Michael who treated Rose like his own daughter and who understood that a real man protects his family, not enables their abusers. We married 4 years after my divorce, and Rose gained the father figure she deserved. The final chapter came 7 years after the wedding incident. David reached out through lawyers, requesting more time with Rose. He claimed he changed, that he'd learned from his mistakes, that he wanted to be a real father. Rose, now 13 and wise beyond her years, made her own decision. I don't want to see him more, she told the family court judge. He let Grandma hurt me, and he never really apologized the right way. Michael is my real dad now. The judge respected Rose's wishes. David's visitation remained limited to occasional supervised visits, and Rose was given the right to refuse them as she got older. I heard through mutual acquaintances that David never fully recovered from losing us. He destroyed the best thing in his life for the sake of keeping peace with his toxic family. Beth and Carol had cost him everything, his wife, his daughter, his career, his future, and for what? A dress. A little girl's pink dress with flowers on it. The dress, by the way, still hangs in Rose's closet. She kept it as a reminder of the day her mother proved that no one, not even family, would ever be allowed to hurt her without consequences. People often ask me if I regret how I handled the situation. They wonder if I went too far, if I was too harsh, if I should have tried to work things out for Rose's sake. My answer is always the same: I protected my daughter. I showed her that she has value, that her boundaries matter, and that no one has the right to abuse her. I taught her that actions have consequences and that standing up for yourself isn't mean, it's necessary. David's family thought they could treat Rose and me like doormats because they'd gotten away with it for years. They thought their family name and their sense of entitlement would protect them from any real consequences. They were wrong. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. Sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who have been planning their escape all along. And sometimes, when you slap a 6-year-old girl over a dress, you discover that her mother is not someone you want as an enemy. I didn't set out to destroy David's family. I set out to protect my daughter and to build a better life for both of us. The fact that David's family faced consequences for their actions was justice, not revenge. Rose is now 13, confident and strong. She knows her worth, and she knows that she never has to accept abuse from anyone. David sees her a few times a year, and she's polite but distant. Beth and Carol have never seen her since that day at the wedding. As for me, I built a successful career helping other women and children escape abusive situations. I remarried a wonderful man who loves Rose as his own. We have 2 more children together, and our home is filled with laughter and love, things that were rare in my first marriage. The last I heard, David was still single, still working in a diminished capacity, still paying the price for choosing his toxic family over his wife and daughter. Beth served her jail time and now lives quietly, her reputation permanently damaged. Carol remarried once, but it didn't last. Her pattern of behavior eventually surfaced again. They all lost everything over a 6-year-old's dress. But really, they lost everything because they chose cruelty over kindness, entitlement over empathy, and power over love. Sometimes I drive past the venue where Mark's wedding took place, and I remember that moment when everything changed. The moment when I realized that I deserved better, that Rose deserved better, and that I had the power to make it happen. That slap changed everything. It ended my first marriage, but it saved my life. And Rose's dress? It still hangs in her closet, a reminder that sometimes the smallest things can change everything, and that standing up for what's right is always worth it, no matter the cost. The best revenge, they say, is living well. But sometimes, the best revenge is also making sure that the people who hurt your child face appropriate consequences for their actions. Sometimes, the best revenge is justice.